trail teachings. My name's Jamie with Sacred Roots. Today we're going to be just kind of building off of the knowledge that we had from last teaching, talking about native species and native pollinators and symbiotic relationships, because a lot of these native pollinators have kind of co-evolved with these native plants, so they kind of need each other. So we're kind of going to build off of that and expand our knowledge in that, and we'll talk about more species and more key characteristics and how to identify new plants. And yeah, so let's get going. Here on the trail, we found a patch of wildflowers behind us, and so we're going to review some information that we collected last teaching. Here's some plants that we went over and some pictures of them. There's no names to them because what we're going to do is wander around the fields and try to find some of these and try to remember some information that we learned and write it down. We're going to write down things like, what kind of leaf pattern do they have? What's the growth pattern? What color are the flowers? Does it have a basal rosette or like a single stalk with like alternate or opposite growing leaves? Do you remember, is it an annual, a perennial, a biennial plant? Just anything that you can remember that's going to help you learn to long-term integrate these skills into your everyday plant identification skills. So that's what we're going to do. Let's go root around. So we ran into a plant that we talked about last month, and I just realized I never really told you guys why it's called bloodroot. So it is a native plant, and I try not to harvest native plants, but I also believe in the 10% rule. So since it's so prolific here, I don't think that pulling one plant is necessarily going to harm the ecosystem. So I'm just going to dig this up and kind of show you guys why they call it bloodroot. It has what's called a rhizome, which we were talking about earlier. And what a rhizome is, it's a root system that kind of mimics like what turmeric looks like. So it doesn't have like a typical root system like a tree or that kind of plant would. So if you dig it up, it's kind of bleeding. You can kind of see that red sap coming out. And what native and indigenous cultures would do is they would use it in a dye or mix it up and crush it, make it into a powder, and then wet it again, make it into a paste and use it as a paint or a dye. It's really cool. So that is why they call it bloodroot.
It was blooming last time.
It was blooming last time.
That's why I didn't recognize it. I didn't remember the leaf pattern. I remember. You said that was blue phlox?
Blue phlox.
What did you call?
Hey, so guess what we found? We found some May-apples. May-apples are actually one of those plants that have a male plant and a female plant. So the male plants will supply the female plants so that the female plant flowers can get pollinated. And this is what the flower looks like. In May is when these flowers would be blooming, but later on, maybe early or mid-June, we would see the May-apples when they're ripe. You don't necessarily want to eat May-apples when they're not ripe because they can have a toxin in them. It's not going to kill you, but it's undesirable. So I wouldn't, I just wouldn't encourage it unless they're ripe. But this is what the flowers look like. If you look close, you can see like a little tiny like guy in the middle. That is the soon-to-be fruit. This will form into more of the actual fruit of itself, which looks like a little teeny tiny green apple growing from where the flower used to be. And over time it'll turn, I think yellow is darker yellow is when the fruit is ripe, but you don't want to eat them when they're green. But yeah, this is a May-apple. It kind of does remind me of bloodroot, which we saw earlier. It kind of has like that same abstract kind of leaf, but we can see that this one, instead of having lobes, it has like individual leaflets, and this is what we would call a compound leaf. It's one leaf made of several individual kind of leaflets, different parts of the same leaf. So this is actually a single leaf made of different parts, and that's what we would call a compound leaf. I found a new treasure. This is what we call jewelweed, a literal treasure, the jewel of the forest. This plant is always an awesome find because, as we know, there's poison ivy, poison oak, poison sumac, literally everywhere, all over the forest. So this is a handy dandy tool to have in the forest. We can use this in a poultice to help relieve the symptoms of poison ivy, that itchiness and that rash, that kind of like inflammation. So if we were to crush this up, chew it up, and use it in a poultice, we could apply that to the area for just a few minutes and it would help relieve the effects from poison ivy. So how I kind of tell jewelry apart from the other plants is it has like a slightly more yellowy green tint to the color of the leaves rather than the darker green surrounding it. In the other plants that we might see, it's just a slightly different shade of green. And if we look at the stems of the leaves, they have like a red tint to them where they meet the actual leaflet. And the margins of the leaf have more of a scalloped look, and it's more kind of like an ovally than a spear shape, the shape of the leaf itself. It does have opposite growing leaves along the stem as well. Even though it doesn't have a basal rosette, it does have a single stem growing from the ground with these opposite growing leaves on them. So it's a very cool plant. It's very interesting, very fun to find. And it's also just a fun and useful thing to find too, because if you ever run into poison ivy, you're going to want to see this.
Okay.
Yes, it is. It's not flowering right now. In the picture it has a flower, but it actually is not flowering at this moment in time. This is wild geranium. She's a beautiful flower. She kind of reminds me of wild rose a little bit, or prairie rose, but the leaf shape is really interesting. It's got these compound leaves with these leaflets coming off, and they almost remind me of a hand. Big, beautiful leaves like that. Gorgeous. These leaf shapes are really unique. I usually see the leaves before I see the flowers, and that's how I identify this plant. And the flowers usually have 5 petals, and the stamens have kind of like a fountain pattern coming out with the little pollen thingies. They're really cute, really pretty flowers. It's a fun find. Hey, I found another forest treasure. This is burdock, and you might know burdock from the really beneficial supplement that people call burdock root. A lot of people drink it in teas. It's very common nowadays, but this is actually the plant that you would harvest from. So the time of year to harvest roots would be in the fall, because all of the plants are kind of getting their energy and going dormant, putting them in their roots to keep warm and survive the winter. So all the energy is going to be stored in the roots during the fall. That's when you want to harvest the roots. During the spring and summertime, all the energy is in the leaves. So if you want to make a tea or eat the greens, during the spring and summer would be the time to do that. But yeah, burdock root is a really fantastic tea to drink. The leaves are edible too. They're really high in nutrients. However, they're a little bit bitter. So if you want to avoid that bitterness, you want to harvest them as early in the springtime as you can. So right about now. Otherwise, if you don't mind the bitterness, that's fine. Later in the summertime, the second year plants are going to grow a big tall stalk. And what you could do with that stalk is kind of chop all the little branches off, chop all the leaves off, take the outer skin off, and eat it like a stalk of celery. It's pretty good, actually. Or you can boil it up and eat it, you know, kind of like you would if you wanted to stir fry with celery. I do that quite often. It's very tasty. But when you dig up the roots, they're pretty thick. They have a taproot, so you're gonna want to need a good shovel. And you dig them out and you wash them real good, and you chop them up into small pieces if you can. That way it'll dry a little bit faster. And you can bake them in the oven at the lowest temp for a couple of hours, or just let them sit for a couple days till they're nice and crunchy, and then dry them up. You got a homemade tea. Cool beans. Hello, I have found another forest treasure. So we're going to talk about columbine. Red columbine is another native plant. It's got these beautiful flowers. They are what we would call compound flowers. So it's one singular flower made of different smaller shapes of flowers. It's kind of like a bell where it hangs down, but you can see these like different tubes on it. It's really cool looking. This plant is going to help support a lot of different species of hummingbirds as well as different pollinators. It's got these leaves that kind of remind me of root anemone. They've got this scallop shape and almost like this mitten kind of shape with the thumb coming out. It's very interesting. It's got like this red stem, and I noticed that it's kind of climbing off of these rocks here. So honestly, the root system can kind of hang on to anything. Found another forest treasure. This is wild ginger. Wild ginger is another native plant. She isn't necessarily symbiotic with a lot of pollinators. She actually has more of a relationship with the mycelium in the soil than she does with the pollinators. She actually is a self-pollinating plant. So she's got both female and male parts in the flower, and when the wind blows or the creatures touch the flowers, the pollen kind of falls into place and it pollinates itself. It's pretty cool. But she's got these heart-shaped leaves and these fuzzy stems, and it's so soft. I love her. The bottom side of the leaf seems to be more fuzzy than the top. But if you dig this root up, it's got that rhizome that we talked about earlier. It's very similar to ginger. Not as thick, though, kind of smaller roots. And in exchange for the plant performing some photosynthesis and converting that energy into carbs and sugar into the soil to feed the mycelium then kind of nourishes those plants back through the roots and helps enrich the soil and bring more fertility to the soil by converting those nutrients into bioavailable forms rather than like straight carbon. So plants can't actually use straight carbon. It has to go through a biological process to be able to be absorbed. And that is something that wild ginger does. So not for the same reasons, but we do still want to conserve this plant. Alrighty guys, I found another forest treasure. So this is hepatica. And as we get further along the teachings, I'm going to include more lookalikes so that we can learn to differentiate similar plants and be confident in knowing what we are identifying. So this kind of looks like Trillium in the fact that it has the same kind of 3-leaf pattern. However, the difference is that sometimes these have like spots on them, but the spots are a little bit lighter rather than like the bold kind of like in your face difference. Like you can clearly see that the Trilliums have spots, whereas these are a little bit more subtle. And then the flowers, it's not blooming right now because it is a spring ephemeral and it is getting a little bit towards summer, later in the spring. But these hepaticas are another spring ephemeral wildflower that we would want to conserve. These do have beautiful leaves, and rather than being more of a triangle shape, like a distinct sharper triangle shape like the Trillium are, these are more rounded and like smooth curves rather than a sharp triangle angle, if that makes sense. So that is how I would differentiate a hepatica versus a Trillium. These also, the leaves and the stalks are going to be in a little bit more dense patches rather than 1 or 2 stalks of a Trillium. So they grow in like a little bit more of a dense patch. So that's another indicator.